Jimmy M. Grimes.
Jack, you want to make sure, is this all set? Is this set up well?
I hope so.
I hope so
It's been
too.
set up the whole time like this.
Can you move the camera a little closer so we can see McKinley better?
Yeah.
Lucky you.
There we go.
We don't matter.
That's what I'm talking about.
All right, and hopefully everyone can hear me. It's nice to see everyone. I can't see people from the corner, but thank you, Darian. Thank you, Jim, for the kind words. Thank you, Brittany. I think it's important. It's an important message. I think it's important to feel just whatever you're feeling. If you're sad, be sad. If you're happy, be happy. And just, they're not good or bad, just feelings. So it's been nice to be back. There's a lot of things that have changed. There's a lot of things that haven't changed. One thing that is odd is that as I went to RPI, ever since I've been there, there's always been construction on a bridge. I'm back, there's still construction on that bridge. The Sky Zone has now been replaced with a medical center, which I find very fitting. Jim still needs to replace his filter on his fridge. It's been maybe 3 or 2 years, but it's nice to be back. Me and Brittany.
Those are just guidelines. The fridge filter. Honestly, I think it's a scam. But once the water stops flowing, I'll replace it.
No one's died from the water, and so I think it's all right. But it's it's nice to be back. We were hoping to come more often, but with pandemics, it wasn't able to happen. But I want to talk about something I believe is a rule of life, that it's something that's not super clear, like biblically, in the sense it's like, oh, the Bible says this, but there's instances of stories where it kind of is proved out through scriptures. And that is that the environment that we put ourselves in influences us and changes us. And so how we'll define environment, we'll define environment by your workplace, by your home, by the people you put around you, and the surroundings that you're in. And it's not in the sense in the Bible, like if you put yourself in this environment, then you are going to grow and you are going to be saved. It's not quite like that. But there are stories we'll get into that there are changes that people have had in their growth because of environments they are put in. And there's certainly evidence I think we can see in our life. And even there was a study that was done on a flea, where what happened was that they decided to put a flea and they put it in a jar. And what would happen is the flea would immediately jump out of the jar. And so what they decided to do, the experimenters, they put a lid on the jar for 3 days. And so each time the flea would jump, it hits the lid. And then after 3 days, they would take the lid off. And what would happen is the fleas, they would jump, but they would never jump out of the jar. They would never jump above where the lid previously was. And so the environment that was put in with these fleas, it altered their behavior. And there's little examples where if you're in a place for a long time, that's not from home, maybe in the South, you might pick up an accent. Brittany has a little bit more Boston in her now. And even just like how you've grown up. For example, if you had, say, controlling parents, then it can influence who you might be attracted to for dating. Like it could influence that if you are looking for a partner, that you want your partner to be really controlling because it's what you know. Or it could be on the contrary, and you could want someone extremely passive because you don't want to associate with that. And so there's little things like that can be influenced. And so I want to read a story in the Bible about the Israelites. And they were put in an environment, and they had been, I think, changed quite a bit. And so we're going to go to Deuteronomy 7 to start. And at this time, the Israelites are out of Egypt, and God has told the Israelites about this promised land in Canaan, and there are people currently there, and God is instructing them on what they need to do when they are beginning to reach the land. So this is Deuteronomy 7, and this is verse 1. When it says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess and drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods. And the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. This is what you are to do with them. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their idols in the fire. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. So God's instructing his people to kill everybody in the land. Now, this seems kind of contrary to an all-loving God. Like, why is God instructing a group of people to completely kill another group of people? I mean, he's kind of proposing genocide, so that seems odd. But to understand why God would make this, would say you guys need to do this, it's important to understand who these people are that are in the land currently. And these 7 nations, they are not innocent nations. You know, a lot of what they would do a lot of witchcraft, and they'd perform a lot of these spells onto each other. And as God said, they would worship false gods. But part of their worship was that they would sacrifice their children. And they would sacrifice their children, in some instances, by fire. And so there's another scripture in Leviticus that describes these people. And this is Leviticus 18, 24 through 25. I'm just going to read it right here. It says, do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, because this is how the nations that I'm going to drive out before you became defiled. Even the land was defiled. So I punished it for its sin, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. So part of God's intention is the Israelites are coming to bring judgment onto these people for their sin. But God is also wanting to protect his people. When we read Deuteronomy, some little highlights of it: make no treaty with them, do not intermarry with them, do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons. Why is he asking this? Because he knows, for they will turn your children away from me to serve other gods. So God's doing this to protect them as well. Because he knows, like, these are not a good crowd to be around. This will influence them. And so naturally, if you've read through the Old Testament, the Israelites have a reputation not to follow God completely. And we can go to Judges 2. And this is in verse 1. And in Judges 2, verse 1, this is the Israelites have started their conquests, they're into the promised land, and they didn't completely listen to the instructions. And it says, the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give to your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land. But you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? And I have also said, I will not drive them out before you. They will become traps for you, and their gods will become snares to you. When the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud, and they called the place Bochim. There they offered sacrifices to the Lord. And so what had happened was that at the end of the conquest, the Israelites were starting to make treaties with some of these nations, which was a clear violation of what God said that you should do. And later on, we read verse 10 of Judges 2. It said, after that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger. And so now we see a once God-fearing people were influenced, as it says here, worship various gods of the peoples around them. And they continue to go into this cycle of following God. We're not following God. We're following God. We're not following God. A judge comes in, delivers Israel. We're following God. God's awesome. And then after a little bit of time, all right, now the culture and the Canaanites and everything that goes back in, and they worship false gods. But even with one of the judges, what happens is one of these judges makes a deal with God that says, all right, so when I come back home from battle, the first person that comes out of my household, I will sacrifice for you. And it turns out to be his daughter. And so even the Canaanite worship has been mixed into how true worship to God is. And so you see that the environment that they were put in influenced their worship, and it set them back. I see this as very relevant for us now because our environments have changed so rapidly because of the pandemic and the crisis that we've been going through. And I think that we've probably experienced some sort of changes over the last 6 months. Like if you maybe have been feeling sluggish, like I've been feeling a lot more sluggish since being at home more often and say not being at church or not going out as much. Maybe feeling a little bit lonelier because you're not seeing people as much. There's certainly some physical sides. There is a COVID-15 that has been talked about just because of some weight gain because of being home so often. There is, I'm sure that purity with some people is really challenging, both in the sisters and the brothers, because you're home so much more often now. You're home alone. I imagine that's a lot more tempting. And I think that what's encouraging to me is like, all right, so there could be an explanation for this. And it's like the environments that we in were changed so rapidly and intensely. I mean, I know someone I know in like for school, he was really strong student, straight A student. And now with online schooling, he's having a really, really hard time. And it's like just the environment, just that's two completely different types of learning. And so I think that it's nice that in the sense of like, all right, there can be an explanation to why, we might be feeling a little bit more sluggish, or why we're not as, say, praying as fervently or reading the Bible as fervently, because our environment has just changed so intensely out of nowhere. And so I want to ask you guys is within your environment, is there anything that you feel like that you need to cut out of it? And so some examples I've thought of is that maybe social media is something that would be best to cut out portions of it. I'm speaking that from experience. There's been a lot of studies and a lot of talk that's shown that high usage rates on social media can cause more increased feelings of depression and cause increased feelings of loneliness. I felt that when I was in college with Facebook specifically. And a big part of it was because there were people I was following that I really didn't care about. And they were having a great time. And you get the FOMO of like, I'm sitting here on my couch and my life is boring. And people are in Hawaii that I don't even like that much. And so I just feel like I'm missing out. I'm getting all these highlights of people's life. And so it caused some depressive feelings in me. And I'm not saying that we should go off social media, but what I'm saying is I think evaluate how you do with that and if it triggers any sort of emotions. I think another thing even is like the actual media, like the news networks, especially nowadays, because my personal opinion is that with media, and this is all of them, Fox, CNN, NBC, is that I feel that they tend to have a bias towards conflict and radicalism and a bias to cause some sort of emotional response from us. Some people would call it getting triggered. And I think that it's important to be informed and know what's going on, especially if we're reaching out to people. It's a current events thing, and I think our perspective is important. But where I have faulted in this is I've looked for things to trigger me, and I've looked for perspectives, and I've looked for stories so that I could just be angry about something. For example, especially right now, the Celtics have been very angering to me. has been awful. And so thankfully their season is done. But with the news, it's just like, there's just certain things that I was just like, I'm looking for things that just want to make me angry. And I think a part of why that feels good is I think that I feel justified knowing that someone else is as angry as I am about something. And so I am just looking for an echo chamber at times of just people being angry about a particular thing that I agree with. And it's not helpful. It's not very helpful to be in that space. When I wake up and I see the news and I get angry, that's a really poor way to start my day. And so I've had to cut back. I've cut back personally some of the sources that I've, that I have been watching, because there's just certain takes that I know that in the past have triggered me and made me angry. And so is your environment a really cluttered and messy space? Well, how is your home doing with more time at home? It's possible if you feel very cluttered and all over the place in your head, it could be because your cars or your homes are very cluttered.
I had to get rid of all my work stuff in my bedroom. Oh my God.
So you take it from Debbie.
It's terrible.
Write that down. Other people, like the people in your environments. I think it's, maybe there's no people in your environment if you're at home a lot. So I'm sorry if that's the, but I'm sure there's, the Bible says bad company corrupts good character. And there are people that you put yourselves around. If you do you put yourself around people that inspire you, or you put yourself around some people that are bad influences? And so I think that the environment in that can have a lot of negative effects and negative changes on us. But I think that we can also use it to leverage and allow us to catalyze changes that we want, so that we can have productive changes. And so if we go back to our flea experiment, when we have the fleas that have been jumping and they hit the lid, and then you took up the lid, they've been in that jar for God knows how long. And then you put other fleas that were not affected by the experiment and mix those fleas in with the fleas that were in the jar. What will happen is that the fleas that were not limited will jump out of the jar. And when that happens, the other fleas will follow. And so an alter of the environment, again, promotes a positive change in the fleas. When you look at Jesus and his disciples were normal, ordinary men. And they go around and they get to see Jesus and they get to see how it's done. They get to see him teach. They get to see him performing miracles. You're going to towns regularly and going to different towns. They get to see people serving Jesus serving them getting taken care of. And although they had been moving to a lot of different places, Jesus was the consistency in their environment. And even the other disciples were consistency. I'd love to hear, I know we know some stories about the disciples bickering with one another and them being all right, who do you think's better? But I'd love to hear them wondering oh, Jesus said this parable. This is what I think. Oh, this is what I think. I'm sure that they benefited from those conversations. In Acts, when they were in the Sanhedrin, one of the things that was said about Peter and John was in Acts 4, when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. I've seen effects of environment within my life, and I know a number of you know this because I've spoken about it before at church, but I was diagnosed with high-functioning autism in high school, and it was very challenging socially, challenging educationally too, but socially it had some challenges where there were social cues that it just didn't register. And so if you rolled your eyes, I couldn't tell that you were upset or that I said something. Or if you're walking towards the door, it didn't register oh, this person probably needs to get going. Especially with humor, because humor is a funny thing where there's a line with humor of wow, that was a really messed up thing to say, or you're hilarious. And I didn't understand that line very well. And so there are times I said some very disrespectful things and was rude, but I just didn't understand. Part of it was because I heard like high school friends saying it to each other, but in that setting, it's okay. In another setting, it's not okay. And so I had a lot of troubles with that. But the biggest thing that helped me growing with just socially was the church and being a part of that atmosphere and that environment. And I think I have 3 reasons for it. I think one, I think Christians tend to be a lot more patient. I think that, you know, when I'm going to all of these different, like these parties or these gatherings or like teen camp or retreats, it was something that if I, you know, said something or I was a little weird, they tend to be a little bit more patient, like take me in, like, and we're all kind of weird. We all have Jesus, you know, whatever. We're all connected. I think another one is that they would tell me if I said something disrespectful. And normally people that are not in church would just leave you alone or just not talk to you anymore. And 3, even if I did say something disrespectful, it was their biblical obligation to forgive me. And so I felt like very, very relaxed because I'm in a very forgiving place. And so with this, so it was almost kind of like I'm learning about these cues at school and like with my IEP program. And I was kind of put in an environment that's like, all right, I can do this stuff. And I feel like I'm in a judgment-free space or a carefree space or a positive atmosphere. And that's really what helped me grow the most with my disability. And so I don't think I've grown out of it, but I think that I've learned how to live with it and how to adjust to it. And so I think that there's things that we can place in our environments that can help us leverage change in a positive way. And so with the fleas, for example, they had other fleas. And so how strong are the relationships that you have within your environment, or who are the relationships that you have in your environment? I think an example of maybe leveraging some positive change is, say, for example, you want to be stronger in your prayer life. Now, reading a bunch of books in the Bible or reading a bunch of books from people that are really strong in prayer in our church, I think are good things. But I also think what could be a really good idea is to be around people whose prayer lives really inspire you and pray with them. I think with purity, if you're struggling with purity, maybe be around people that are really strong in their purity. And maybe the way they talk about things would help you and rub off on you. Really, any character trait. You could surround yourself with people that you feel exhibit that trait and inspire you in that trait. And that's, I'm sure, a part of a way that can also rub off on you. You know, do you have I think spaces, so like having like a workspace and like a home space, especially when you're working from home. I had so much trouble with working at home and feeling sluggish because I would work on my couch, which is where I, do nothing. And so, it's almost like a connection in my brain. Like, this isn't where you work. This isn't supposed to be a place you get stuff done. So then I would try to find a different spot in my house to actually do things. I think that putting yourself in an environment to recharge and to actually get full when you're empty, to actually fill yourself up. And whether that means to have like yoga or hiking or some leisure activity that's really good for you, that fills you up. I think that's important. I think American culture, I think it is almost like glorifying like hardworking if you consistently run yourself on empty. And there needs to be a healthy balance. Yeah. I mean, even the Sabbath was instituted before humankind in the Bible. It's an important thing to take a rest. So you put yourself in an environment to feel that rest. I think even with the relationship stuff, one of the knocks of being on a learning disability is you can grow up thinking you're stupid because you're, special needs. So you're special, but it feels like a handicap. And so I felt that, you know, I had extended time on tests, so I wasn't like the other kids. They had to give me special privileges. And so with that, I've always grown up thinking I'm dumb, which I know is not true because I got a degree. I went to RPI, which is a renowned university. And so the facts do not line up with that, but that is the message that I keep telling myself. And so it changed at work because at work, I'm around people that immediately shuts down self-deprecation. And so if I'm like doing something and I'm trying to solve a problem, I'm like, oh, that was so dumb. My work people are like, stop that. No, you're not. And being in an environment where it's primarily males tend to really pat themselves on the back every single instance that they can. And so you randomly hear in the far corner of the office, someone proclaiming, I am a genius, a genius for solving that problem. And so then it's come home. Yeah. I come home and tell Brittany, I am a genius. I am so smart, Brittany. It makes Brittany's job really easy because Brittany doesn't feel like she needs to encourage me because I'm really good at encouraging myself. But it's an environment change that helped me with my positive thinking. Being part of a positive environment has helped me shape my thinking and be more confident. Being with confident people that know that they're smart and know what they're doing. And so I believe that our environment, we can use it to help shape us, and it could shape us in either a negative way or within a positive way. And if you do not change your environment will change you. So this leads me to believe that we're working on things, or we're feeling very sluggish and the stay-at-home culture, or feeling lonely, then maybe it starts with evaluating the environments that we are putting ourselves in and how those are working on us. That's how so much of my positive growth has been. I can pin to factors within environments that I was put in. You know, the fleas, of course, changed because of a byproduct of their environment, and the Israelites changed. This leads me to believe that transformation, it can start by changing your environment. And so are there things that you can change today? And don't just take my word for it that these things work or my stories, but see if you can find a small change that you can make, and then go and you can see for yourself. So do we have a closing song?
There we go.
All right, well, we will have a closing song. And so I'm going to switch spots with Jack. I've heard no clapping.